Okay, so how do we get the lead to do a proper cost benefit analysis and actually come to the correct conclusion, which is to purchase coverage? We start with the sales framework. Which we mirror after the hero's journey. Right? The hero's journey has a couple of elements. It has, of course, a hero. We have a guide. And we have a goal. We also have the journey itself, but the journey itself is your framework. So for the hero is good. The hero is responsible. The hero is brave, okay? They're a good person. They do the right thing, even when it's against their own emotions. Despite themselves, they do the right thing because it's necessary for the greater good, for themselves and their family. And if the hero doesn't do it, who's going to do it? The hero has to. Guide. You, the agent, you're the guide, okay? You're the guide because you're experienced, you're trusted, and most importantly, you remind the hero of their role, right? And their goal. And their goal is to get coverage. For themselves, and most importantly, for their loved ones. How that applies to the framework, let's go through it. So the framework broken down into its parts are the introduction, information gathering, identification of the pain point, a solution, cost benefit analysis, and decision to buy. You probably, pretty immediately see how this works, how these coincide with these, but let's go through them. So inside of the introduction is where you establish yourself as the guide. In terms of information gathering, that's where you verify and qualify lead information, right? So if you have the information beforehand, then you come to the conversation, the sales conversation, verifying the information first before you qualify them. If you don't, then you just ask questions, qualify them, make sure that you're able to help them before you even get started. Make sure you have qualified leads. It's important for the lead to be qualified. Then we identify the pain point. In this portion is where you find out your lead's reason for the need of coverage and who it's for, the beneficiary information. That's where you get that. Also, importantly here is where you anchor your lead as a hero. So here's where you establish that your lead is good, responsible, and brave, which is important because that is, of course, the role of a hero. So we have the journey, which is the framework. We have a hero, which is a lead, and we have a guide, who is you. Once this is done, we have a hero and a reason to be a hero. Now we provide a solution. Or, I shouldn't say that. We provide the tools so that the solution can be reached. It's still the hero's job to reach their own conclusion and make their own decisions and get their own solution. All you can do as a guide is provide them with the tools and be trusted there to keep them from being distracted and remind them of their roles and their goals. But in the solution portion, as far as tool provision, you educate, which is to tell them about the policy coverage, bells and whistles. What does it do? How does it help? Why is it important? Why is it useful? Why is it something that's worth their time and their money and their energy? Then you do the Q&A portion. Just answer questions if they have any questions, which of course they will. And of course you'll be able to answer them because you've done all the work to know that you have the best policy for them and why it's useful for them to make the decision to buy. Then you go over cost, which brings us to cost benefit analysis, right? So you're seeing how, okay. Let's do a darker red. So in terms of the costs versus benefits analysis, right? Generally speaking, this is where the distractions or objections come. And they come in the form of, when dealing with cost, the actual, dollar amount. So let's say X amount over a time interval. Time or level of urgency itself. A bonus one, it's like spouse or partner or, giving the power to make the decision to somebody else. Or, sorry, let me see if I can push this down. Better. Or just, simple discomfort with change. It's just not comfortable, which is fine. But it's important here to guide your hero and reframe each of these, because it's not a cost per se, but a cost versus a benefit. And so properly educating, answering questions that will help them essentially frame these costs and juxtapose them to the benefit they would get. And done properly, the lead or the hero, the lead, will feel like they get the better end of the deal, right? Let me explain. So we can say it's, X amount that they're dealing with, but really what it is framing it such that X amount is less than the benefit of the coverage for their loved one or loved ones. So this can be a number or a number over time by itself, and that's fine, but that's relative. So we need to compare it to the benefits that they get for the expense of that time, or for the expense of that cost, and make sure they feel like it's worth more to spend it because of the value they get back in the coverage. Okay. As far as time or level of urgency, somebody saying, I'm thinking about it, or I plan to do it in a few weeks, or I'm just looking around, the level of urgency isn't high enough for what it should be, because if our hero, which we anchored here, has a reason and a need for coverage and somebody to cover, or they're looking for it and we're having this conversation because they don't have it, then they're on borrowed time. You understand? The best time to have gotten that coverage was before now. The second and next best time is right now. And it's our job to help them understand that, because you never know when you're going to go. As far as spouse, a good way to reframe this is by asking them, okay, I understand you want to speak to your spouse, or your spouse makes the decisions like this. Let's see here. That's not a problem. But let me just ask you, should your spouse or your loved one or your significant other or your partner, your decision maker, come home and say, hey, by the way, I want you to know that I got coverage for our family in case of the unforeseen. How would you feel? What would your reaction be? Would it be positive or negative? It would likely be positive. In fact, you'd probably see them more as a hero, which they are, because they're doing something that's good, responsible, and brave, right? So it's about reframing it. And then just, discomfort. Sometimes people don't have, and I want to, generally speaking, these two. So generally speaking, these are more logic-based conversations. And then here, these tend to be more emotional, right? And I exemplify that in the discomfort one. So about the level of comfort, that's okay. It's not a problem to be uncomfortable. But is your level of comfort more important than, again, coverage for your loved ones? And also, being uncomfortable is okay, but it is not okay to be unprepared. And not being prepared because you were uncomfortable about making the decision you knew you need to make is not acceptable, especially when it's coverage for your loved ones or getting coverage for yourself and your loved ones. And doing something that you're not comfortable doing, but still, intellectually understanding that it is for the greater good of yourself and your family is a brave trait, which is a trait heroes have, which we anchored our lead in during the pain point part. And it's our job to remind our hero of their role, of which includes being brave, and their goal, which isn't to worry about the cost or not having time or what their spouse will say or how comfortable they are. Their goal is deciding to buy. Right? So in the end, really what you're doing is you're making not buying something that is unreasonable. So that the only reasonable thing to do will be to buy. And so they can make that decision to buy and by proxy reach their goal, which will prove in fact that they are a hero, which we anchored them at here.